The silence was the point. Here, at the Concordance Deep Field Observatory, suspended in the Lagrange point of a gas giant named Seraphina, silence was data. It was the background hum of the cosmos against which all other things were measured. For Lyra, a junior astronomer on the graveyard shift, it was also profoundly boring. Her task was simple: watch the ancient, stable stars of the Perseus Arm, a quadrant of space so predictable that it was used to calibrate the very instruments she now monitored. For 7 straight cycles, nothing had happened. The ancient suns had burned with the same steady light they had for millennia. The gravitational constants remained constant. And Lyra had spent most of her time rereading her dissertation on stellar nucleosynthesis. It was on her 8th cycle, as Seraphina's immense sapphire and pearl storms churned 200,000 miles below, that an alarm chimed. It wasn't the piercing shriek of a proximity alert or the urgent thrum of a system failure. It was a single, inquisitive ping. Query: data mismatch. Sector 904. Lyra leaned forward, her multifaceted Cygnian eyes narrowing. Sector 904. That was the Epsilon Indi system, a G-type main sequence star, 6 planets, thoroughly unremarkable. It was a stellar control group, a constant against which other, more volatile systems were compared. A data mismatch was unlikely. She ran the deep field scan again. The array of telescopes, spread across a 100-mile network, drank in the light from across the void and collated it. The result came back unchanged. Where Epsilon Indi should have been, there was nothing. Her 3 hearts gave a nervous flutter. This was impossible. Stars didn't just vanish. They went nova. They collapsed into black holes. They dimmed into red dwarfs over billions of years. They didn't simply cease to exist. She checked the gravitational sensors. The subtle warp in space-time, caused by the star's mass, a dip in the fabric of the universe that had been charted for 10,000 years, was gone. The parallax data returned a stream of zeros. Frantically, Lyra pulled up the archival plates, the raw light capture images that formed the basis of their star charts. She scrolled back a cycle. There it was, Epsilon Indi, a familiar, comforting, yellow-white pinprick. She moved forward. 1 hour ago, still there. 10 minutes ago, still there. The most recent scan, nothing. Just the cold, featureless black of the void, with the more distant stars shining serenely from behind the place where a sun used to be. It wasn't destroyed. It was edited. Master Orin, she subvocalized, her voice trembling slightly. I have an anomaly in Sector 904. Her superior's voice crackled back, thick with sleep. A sensor ghost, Junior. Rerun the diagnostics and recalibrate the array. A micrometeorite probably knocked a sensor out of alignment. Sir, I've run the diagnostics 3 times. All systems are green, Lyra insisted. The Epsilon Indi system is gone. There was a long pause, filled with the static of Orin's annoyance. That's impossible. Log the sensor ghost as per protocol and file the report. I'll review it in the morning. The connection clicked off. Lyra stared at the screen, at the hole in the sky. She did as she was told, logging the event as a probable sensor malfunction. But as she filed the report, a deep, primal fear settled in her gut. It wasn't a malfunction. The silence from that patch of sky was different now. It wasn't the peaceful hum of the cosmos. It was the chilling, absolute silence of a page that had been violently torn from the book of the universe, leaving behind nothing but a raw, empty space where something used to be. On the Cygnus spire, the 1,000-mile-high needle of crystal, and light that served as the Concordance's capital, there was no silence. There was only the endless mannered drone of debate. Sovereign Kaelin, her silver robes shimmering like captured starlight, watched the main holographic display with a growing sense of weary disgust. The feed was live from the Xylos system, a mid-rim protectorate known for its delicate art and peaceful philosophy. Now it was known for its fires. The ships of the Vorlag hegemony swarmed the planet. They were monstrous things, chitinous and asymmetrical, looking more like spacefaring beetles than starships. They moved with a singular, horrifying purpose, their plasma cannons systematically cracking the planet's crystalline cities, turning millennia of culture into superheated dust. Their orbital defenses have fallen, Emissary Lorian, Kalen's chief advisor, stated needlessly. His voice, usually a soothing baritone, was strained. The Vorlag are beginning their ground invasion. This is an outrage, boomed the representative of the Cathar, a 7-foot being of living silicon whose voice sounded like grinding rock. The Concordance Charter is clear. An unprovoked attack on a member world demands a unified military response. We must dispatch the 3rd and 5th battle fleets at once and leave the core worlds vulnerable, countered the luminary delegate, a shimmering cloud of sentient gas contained within a swirling glass column. The Vorlag have the single largest fleet in this galactic arm. A direct confrontation would be unwise. Sanctions are the only logical path. A full economic embargo. Sanctions, the Cathar delegate interrupted with a rattling laugh. You cannot embargo a plague, luminary. You exterminate it. Kalen listened to the bickering with a cold weight in her stomach. It was always the same. The Cathar demanded war, the Luminians urged caution, and the other dozen species on the High Council dithered, each worried about how a conflict would affect their trade agreements and territorial claims. The Concordance wasn't a government. It was a committee, and its only real talent was for indecision. Their fleets, while powerful, were spread thin across thousands of light years, guarding shipping lanes and posturing on disputed borders. They were a navy built for policing, not for total war. The Vorlag knew this. They had chosen their target perfectly, a world too far for a rapid response, and too minor to risk a full-scale war over. The people of Xylos would be sacrificed on the altar of political convenience. As the debate droned on, a minor intelligence brief scrolled across Kalen's private datapad. She almost dismissed it. Stellar Anomaly Report, Gamma Serpentis. Another star system on the galactic fringe had gone dark, just like the Epsilon Indi incident 2 weeks prior. The report noted the phenomenon was statistically impossible, but classified it as low-priority sensor interference. In the face of a planetary invasion, a few miscalibrated telescopes seemed utterly irrelevant. She flicked it away. On the main screen, the feed from Xylos flickered. A final, desperate transmission pushed through the static. The sound of screams, the shattering of crystal, the roar of flames. Then, silence. The debate in the grand hall stuttered to a halt. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the anti-gravity generators. The delegates stared at the screen, at the static that represented 10 billion lives. They had watched a world die, because they couldn't agree on a course of action. Sovereign Kalen felt the shame of it like a physical blow. The Vorlag would continue. Another world would burn, and another, and the Concordance would do nothing but talk. She looked out the Grand Chamber's viewport at the endless sea of stars, and for the first time in her long life, she felt truly, utterly helpless. The galaxy was broken, and she had no idea how to fix it. The Vorlag hegemony, fat and arrogant from their victory at Xylos, moved on. Their target was a cluster of independent mining colonies in the Kepler belt, soft targets ripe for plunder and enslavement. Their fleet, over 1,000 strong, transitioned from hyperspace in a show of overwhelming force, their chitinous ships blotting out the light of the distant star. Vorlag overlord Cathar, from the bridge of his flagship, Worldbreaker, watched the system's primary planet spin lazily on his view screen. Another world to feed the hegemony, another day of glorious, profitable conquest. It was his sensor technician who saw it first, his mandibles clicking in confusion. Overlord, I am detecting spatial anomalies ahead of the fleet. Cathar glanced at the screen. Space itself seemed to be glitching, tearing open in jagged, silent rifts that shimmered with colors no known star could produce. They looked like wounds in the fabric of reality. From these wounds, ships emerged. They were nothing like the elegant craft of the Concordance or the organic monstrosities of the Vorlag. These were brutalist wedges of dark, non-reflective metal, angular and scarred. They looked less like starships and more like projectile weapons with engines strapped to them. They bore no insignia, broadcast no identification codes, and emitted energy signatures that were utterly alien, a low, predatory hum that the Vorlag sensors struggled to classify. From a safe distance, a cloaked Concordance probe, tasked with monitoring the Vorlag's advance, recorded the scene. Its AI sent a priority alert back to the Cygnus Spire, its logic circuits struggling to categorize the new arrivals. They fit no known profile. Aboard the Worldbreaker, the Vorlag bridge crew erupted in derisive chittering. "What are these relics?" Cathar's second-in-command sneered. "They look like they were carved from asteroids." Cathar agreed. They were pathetic. An unknown species, likely scavengers, who had foolishly wandered into the path of their armada. They would serve as a good lesson. "Destroyer Wing Gamma," he commanded, a bored flick of his clawed hand. "Fire a disciplinary volley. Show them the price of insolence." A dozen Vorlag destroyers moved forward, their plasma lances glowing a malevolent purple. They unleashed a coordinated volley, a wave of incandescent energy that streaked across the void, powerful enough to melt the defenses of a planetary fortress. The entire volley converged on the lead unknown ship, a vessel larger and more scarred than the others. The energy slammed into its hull. There was no explosion, no shattering of armor. The strange, dark metal simply glowed. First cherry red, then white hot, appearing to absorb the thermal energy with an impossible appetite. For a moment, it hung there, glowing like a vengeful star. Then the light faded, leaving the ship's scarred hull completely unharmed. Silence fell across the bridge of the Worldbreaker. The chittering laughter died in their throats. On the bridge of the UNS Vengeance, Admiral Marcus Kane watched his tactical display. Shields absorbed and redistributed 98.7% of the energy impact, Commander Eva Rostova reported, her voice perfectly calm. "Minor surface heating. Negligible." Kane nodded once. "They're confused." "Good." He looked at the Vorlag fleet, now a hesitant, disorganized swarm. "They've had their warning shot. Time for ours." Across the human fleet, massive armored plates slid open with a sound that no one but their crews could hear. They did not reveal gleaming energy cannons or complex missile arrays. Instead, they revealed rows upon rows of simple launch tubes, dark and hollow like the eyes of a skull. They looked primitive, archaic. Then, from those tubes, streaks of fire erupted. What emerged from the human ships was not the elegant lance of a laser, or the blossoming fire of a plasma torpedo. It was simply metal. Hundreds of tungsten rods, each the size of a skyscraper, launched at a significant fraction of the speed of light. They were primitive, brutal, and utterly unstoppable. Aboard the Concordance probe, the observing AI frantically tried to classify the weapons. Analysis, kinetic impactors. Threat level, incalculable. The Vorlag energy shields, designed to disperse and deflect energy, were catastrophically useless against solid objects moving with such relativistic fury. The first wave of human projectiles didn't explode. They simply arrived. A Vorlag cruiser vanished in a silent flash of vaporized metal and shattered chitin as a single rod passed through it stem to stern. Another was neatly cored, its fusion reactor detonating in a secondary blast. A third was clipped by a glancing blow that sheared off its entire command section, sending it tumbling lifelessly into the void. The Vorlag fleet, which had never known a real defeat, broke. Panic, a sensation their hive mind was ill-equipped to process, rippled through their network. Ships turned to flee, only to collide with their comrades. Their perfect disciplined formations devolved into a chaotic scrum of terrified vessels. And then the true horror began. The smaller human ships, corvette and frigate-sized vessels flickered. One moment, they were 500,000 miles away. The next, they materialized directly beside a Vorlag destroyer, well inside its shield bubble. The tactic was a violation of known physics, a suicidal maneuver that should have torn the jumping ship apart. Yet the humans did it with casual precision. From point-blank range, they fired, not with massive cannons, but with batteries of smaller, rapid-fire railguns that stitched lines of molten holes across the Vorlag ship's hull before it could even bring its weapons to bear. Then, just as quickly, the human ship would flicker and vanish, reappearing miles away to line up its next victim. "Jump solution calculated," Commander Rostova announced on the Vengeance's bridge, her voice a stark contrast to the chaos on the view screen. "Executing attack run Epsilon. Execute," Admiral Kane said, his eyes never leaving the tactical display. The Vengeance itself didn't jump. It was the conductor of this orchestra. Its role was more insidious. "The hive mind network is compromised," reported the ship's AI, its synthesized voice eerily calm. "We are now feeding corrupted targeting data to their battle groups." Suddenly, Vorlag ships began firing on each other. A heavy cruiser, thinking it was targeting a human frigate, unleashed a full plasma barrage into the side of its own support vessel. Destroyer wings, fed ghost signals of human ships in their midst, turned inward and began a frantic circular firefight against enemies that weren't there. The Vorlag's greatest strength, their perfect instantaneous coordination, had been turned into their greatest vulnerability. They were a body at war with itself, blindly tearing itself apart. Aboard the Worldbreaker, Overlord Cathar stared in disbelief as his grand armada annihilated itself. His commands were lost in a storm of static and false reports. His fleet was dying, and he couldn't understand how. These weren't tactics. This was a dissection. The Concordance probe continued to record, its AI finally finding a classification for the event it was witnessing. It wasn't a battle. It was a systems collapse. The humans weren't fighting the Vorlag. They were solving them like a complex mathematical equation. They had analyzed every strength and turned it into a fatal flaw. The slaughter lasted less than 2 hours. Of the 1,000-strong Vorlag fleet, only a handful of crippled, powerless ships remained, drifting amidst the silent, glittering graveyard of their comrades. No quarter had been given. No surrender had been accepted. Admiral Kane watched, the last red icon fade from the tactical map. He turned to Rostova, his face like stone. "Is the Overlord's ship still functional?" "Barely, Admiral. Life support is failing, but he's alive." "Good." Kane's gaze was cold. "Commander, issue our first and only order to the remnants of the hegemony." Rostova nodded, opening a channel. Her voice broadcast across the system, a calm, clear pronouncement of doom. "To all surviving Vorlag vessels, this is Commander Ava Rostova of the United Nations of Sol warship Vengeance. Our battle is not with your species. It is with your leadership. Execute your overlord. Do so, and your crews will be allowed to return to your home world to carry the tale of this day. Refuse, and we will not leave enough of your ships to make a memory." The transmission ended. On the bridge of the Worldbreaker, Cathar's own crew turned to look at him, their compound eyes filled not with loyalty, but with a terrifying, primal understanding. They had been given a choice: die with their leader, or live to tell the galaxy about the ghosts who had returned from the void. The recording from the Concordance probe spread through the High Council like a virus. It played on a loop in the Grand Chamber on the Cygnus Spire, in the war rooms of the Cathar, and in the contemplative energy spires of the Luminians. The footage was analyzed, dissected by every military AI, and scrutinized by every strategist in the core worlds. The conclusion was always the same. What the humans had done was impossible. Ships could not make precision microjumps without tearing themselves apart. Kinetic weapons should not have been effective against modern energy shielding. And no fleet could be coordinated with such flawless, silent precision. Yet the proof was there, floating in the void. the glittering debris field that used to be the Vorlag hegemony. Even more terrifying than the battle itself was the aftermath. The human fleet did not leave. They remained in the now cleansed Kepler belt, moving with a methodical purpose that chilled observers to the core. Their dark, angular ships prowled through the wreckage, using tractor beams to pull in pieces of Vorlag technology, analyzing, scavenging, learning. They were like vultures picking a carcass clean, their silence more menacing than any victory. Speech, panic, a rare and undignified emotion gripped the Concordance. Who were these beings? The myths called them humans, a long-dead species from a forgotten system called Terra. The stories were contradictory. Some painted them as noble explorers, others as ruthless conquerors who had burned themselves out in a final apocalyptic war. No one knew the truth. They were ghosts, and their return had broken every known rule of galactic power. The High Council was paralyzed. "We must send our fleet!" the Cathar delegate roared, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "We must show them the Concordance is not a broken prey species like the Vorlag." "And what if they do to our fleet what they did?" "To the Vorlag?" the luminary delegate countered, his gaseous form swirling with agitation. "We have just witnessed a power that defies our understanding of physics. To engage them militarily would be to gamble with the survival of every species." In this chamber, for weeks they argued. For weeks the human fleet sat in silent vigil over their kill. They made no demands, they sent no transmissions, they simply were, an immovable, terrifying presence on the edge of concordant space. Finally, Sovereign Kalen could bear the inaction no longer. The fear of the unknown was proving more corrosive than any direct threat. With the reluctant approval of the Council, she drafted a message herself. It was a masterpiece of Signian diplomacy, translated into over 1,000 languages, including the fragmented data dialects thought to be of ancient human origin. It was respectful, cautious, and offered open dialogue. It asked a simple question. "Who are you?" She broadcast it toward the Kepler belt, expecting no reply. It was a message in a bottle, tossed into an ocean of dread. The response was instantaneous. No voice. No hologram. Just a single, untraceable text transmission, delivered in perfect, archaic Signian script. A dialect that hadn't been used in 5,000 years. It contained only 2 words. Proceed. Vengeance. It took her scholars an hour to fully parse the meaning. Vengeance was clearly the name of the human flagship. And proceed. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. The humans were not coming to the Concordance. The Concordance was being called to them. Sovereign Kalen looked at her chief advisor, Emissary Lorien, his face pale. "Prepare my diplomatic vessel," she said, her voice betraying none of the fear that was coiling in her gut. "It seems we have an appointment." Sovereign Kalen's diplomatic vessel, the Stardust Harp, was a masterpiece of Signian engineering, a ship of elegant, sweeping curves and soft, internal light. It was designed to awe and soothe. The human flagship it docked with was its antithesis. The UNS Vengeance was a fortress, a colossal block of dark, scarred metal that seemed to absorb the light around it. There were no graceful lines, only brutally efficient angles. As the Stardust Harp latched on, the sound of the magnetic clamps was less a greeting, and more the tolling of a bell. Kalen, flanked by Emissary Lorien, was met at the airlock by a squad of human soldiers. They were clad head to toe in matte black armor, their faces concealed by visors that reflected nothing. They moved with a synchronized discipline that was unnerving, their heavy boots echoing on the grated deck. They carried projectile rifles, barbaric by concordant standards. But Kalen had seen the probe footage. She knew what those barbaric weapons could do. The soldiers escorted them through the ship's corridors. It was like walking through the guts of some great industrial machine. Exposed conduits and reinforced bulkheads lined the passageways, all painted a uniform, utilitarian grey. There was no art, no comfort, only function. And beneath it all, a deep, low thrum, the sound of a power source so immense it made the air feel heavy, pressing in on them. They were led not to a grand meeting chamber, but to the bridge. It was a cramped, dimly lit combat information center, packed with instrument panels that flickered with data streams Kalen's implants couldn't begin to decipher. A dozen human crew members worked at their stations, their focus absolute. None of them looked up as she entered. At the center of the room, staring at a massive holographic star chart, stood a man in a simple grey uniform. He turned as they entered. His face was sharp, lined with experience, and his eyes were the color of a frozen sea. This was Admiral Marcus Kane. "Sovereign Kalen," he said. It was not a question. Kalen gathered her diplomatic training like a shield. "Admiral Kane, on behalf of the Concordance, I thank you for agreeing to this meeting. It is our sincerest hope that we can forge a path of mutual understanding and ensure continued peace throughout the galaxy." Kane almost smiled, but the expression held no humor. It was the grimace of a predator. "Peace," he repeated, the word sounding alien in this place of war. "The Concordance has had 10,000 years to ensure peace. Instead, you presided over its decay. You let the Vorlag fester and grow, you ignored the cries for help from a dozen worlds, and you stood by while Xylos burned." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "The Concordance doesn't want peace, it wants control, and its control is at an end." Lorien stepped forward protectively. "Admiral, our intentions are honorable." "Your intentions are irrelevant," Kane cut him off, his gaze never leaving Kalen. "We know what you did." Kalen's blood ran cold. "What we did?" "The great betrayal, the war of extinction, the history you tried to bury." Kane gestured to one of the screens. An ancient star chart appeared, showing a section of the galaxy that was now empty. "You remember the last war, Sovereign? The one where your founders made a pact with humanity? The one you conveniently erased from your public records?" Kalen was speechless. Those records were sealed at the highest possible level, mythologized into vague warnings about hubris. How could they know? "Our long dark, as we call it, was educational," Kane continued, his voice dangerously soft. "When you're cut off from everything, you have time to learn. You're forced to innovate. You're forced to master the sciences that comfortable, stagnant empires like yours deem forbidden because you're too afraid of them." He circled the holographic table. "Dimensional engineering, temporal mechanics, fields of study you outlawed as abominations. We perfected them as tools for survival." He stopped directly in front of her. "So you see, Sovereign, this isn't a negotiation. You have nothing to offer us. We are not here as equals. We are here to present you with the bill for your betrayals." He leaned in, his voice a whisper that cut through her diplomatic armor like a surgeon's knife. "And now, you're going to tell me exactly what happened to our home." "Our home?" Sovereign Kalen repeated, forcing a strength into her voice she did not feel. "Admiral, the Concordance has no records pertaining to the location of Terra. It is a system lost to the ravages of time." "Lost?" Kane's laugh was a short, sharp bark devoid of humor. "No, not lost, taken." He turned back to the main holographic display. "You speak of fragmented records and the actions of your ancestors as if they are ancient history. You hold yourselves blameless. But we found our own records, in the ruins of our outer colonies, buried in data vaults you thought were destroyed. We found the truth." He raised his hand, and the star chart on the display was replaced by something else. It was a data log, grainy and flickering with age. The insignia of an ancient human vessel, the UNS Odyssey, was watermarked in the corner. It was a science vessel, not a warship. The log was audio, a frantic, terrified voice speaking over a cacophony of alarms. "Repeat, this is Science Officer Anya Sharma of the UNS Odyssey. The Concordance fleet is not retreating! I say again, they are not retreating!" The voice was panicked, breathless. "They formed a stellar cordon. The energy readings they're impossible. They're anchoring something to the local space-time continuum." "Oh gods!" They're not running from the enemy. They are the enemy. The display shifted to a visual sensor log. It showed hundreds of ancient concordance ships, Cygnian, Cathar, and others, arranged in a precise, galaxy-spanning geometric formation. They weren't fighting anything. They were working in concert, unleashing colossal beams of energy that weren't destructive, but constructive. The beams converged on a single point in space. A familiar G-type star, Terra's star. They called it the Elysian Mandate, Kane said, his voice a low growl. A quarantine. They feared our expansion, our unpredictability, our aggression. They saw us as a virus that needed to be contained, so they built a cage. The log from the Odyssey continued, the voice now breaking with despair. It's a causal separator, a pocket dimension locked out of phase with baseline reality. They're not destroying us. They're erasing us, cutting us out of the universe. May God have mercy on our souls. They're closing. The transmission ended in a burst of static. Kane swept his hand across the display. The ancient log vanished, replaced by the modern star chart, with the blinking red icons marking the systems at Epsilon Indi and Gamma Serpentis that had recently vanished. Those anomalies your astronomers have been reporting. Kane said, his voice cold as the void. That is us. For centuries we have been reverse engineering the technology of our prison. Those disappearing stars are not stars. They are the ancient anchors of the quarantine field. We are not destroying them. We are dismantling them. We are systematically taking apart the cage your ancestors built, piece by piece. He stared directly at Kaelin, the frozen fury in his eyes making it hard for her to breathe. The revelation was absolute world-shattering. Humanity's return wasn't a campaign of conquest. The destruction of the Vorlag wasn't a show of force. It was a means to an end, clearing a path, securing resources, and ensuring no one could interfere. Their entire war was a jailbreak, a desperate centuries-long quest by a lost people to tear down the walls of their prison and find their way back home. And the Concordance wasn't just a historic betrayer. They were the jailers. Sovereign Kaelin stared at Admiral Kane, the truth of his words washing over her in a sickening wave. 10 millennia of Cygnian leadership, of concordant stability, of galactic peace, all of it had been built upon a lie. They weren't the galaxy's benevolent guardians. They were its wardens, and they had locked away a species for the crime of being different. The Vorlag, for all their brutality, had only conquered worlds. Her ancestors had stolen a home from its own reality. What do you want from us? She finally managed to ask, her voice a hollow whisper. Justice was impossible. Vengeance would mean the end of everything she knew. Kane's expression remained unreadable. Want from you? Nothing. He gestured to a small glowing diode on the console. This conversation, Sovereign, has been broadcasting live to your High Council since you stepped aboard this vessel. Kaelin's head snapped up. On the main view screen, the faces of the Concordance delegates appeared, one by one. She saw the Cathar delegate, his rock-like face frozen in shock. She saw the luminary, his gaseous form churning with a violence she'd never witnessed. She saw the leaders of a dozen other species, their expressions a mixture of horror, disbelief, and for some, a dawning, terrible understanding. The log of the UNS Odyssey was playing on a loop for them all to see. For 10,000 years, Kane's voice boomed across the silent channel, addressing not just Kaelin, but the entire crumbling foundation of galactic power. You have lived under a government predicated on a lie. You have benefited from a peace that was purchased with the imprisonment of an entire species. He paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle. The Concordance, as an institution, is illegitimate. Its authority is void, effective immediately. It is dissolved. An uproar erupted from the delegates. The Cathar roared in fury, not at Kane, but at the realization of the long deception. The lesser powers, species that had chafed for centuries under Cygnian dominance, began to see an opportunity. Humanity will oversee the formation of a new galactic pact, Kane continued, his voice cutting through the chaos. One based, not on fear and suppression, but on transparency and mutual defense. All species who were wronged by the Concordance or its proxies are invited to join. All who seek a future free from the dogma of the past are welcome. As he spoke, new signals began flooding the Vengeance's comms. The recently liberated mining colonies in the Kepler Belt pledged their allegiance. The remnants of the Xylos government, operating from a refugee fleet, declared their loyalty to the United Nations of Sol. Species Kalen had never even heard of, from the far side of the Perseus Arm, began broadcasting messages of support. The Concordance didn't fall in a grand battle, it evaporated. Its authority, built on a carefully maintained history, vanished the moment that history was exposed as a fraud. Sovereign Kalen watched as, in the space of a few minutes, her entire civilization was relegated to the dustbin of history, becoming the very thing they had tried to make of humanity. A myth. Days turned into weeks. A new order began to coalesce from the ashes of the old. On the bridge of the UNS Vengeance, which held a stationary orbit over the Cygnus Spire, Admiral Kane watched the frantic diplomatic traffic reshape the galaxy under the humiliated but pragmatic guidance of a now powerless Kalen. The Concordance was being dismantled. Old treaties were nullified, closed borders were opened, and a new pact was being forged under the watchful eye of the human fleet. Commander, Rostova approached Kane as he stood before the main holographic display. The star chart was alive with color, a testament to their success. Dozens of systems, once beholden to the Concordance, had formally pledged their resources and loyalty to the new alliance, their icons shifting from the silver of the old regime to the solid blue of the UNS. "We did it, Admiral," Rostova said, her voice filled with a quiet awe. "The Concordance is finished. We've remade the galaxy in less than a month." Kane didn't turn. His gaze was fixed not on the newly blue systems, but on the vast, unnerving patch of blackness at the heart of the chart. The last remnant of the quarantine field, a gaping wound in the map where countless stars, and one very specific one, should be. "We've corrected a historical injustice, Commander," he said, his voice low. "We have held the guilty accountable, but our mission is not over." He zoomed the display in, focusing on that terrible silent void. The scale of it was immense, a prison encompassing thousands of cubic light years. Somewhere within that dimensional cage, hidden from the universe for 10,000 years, was a small yellow star and its third planet. "They thought they were protecting the galaxy from us," Kane murmured, more to himself than to Rostova. "They never considered that one day we would tear our way out just to get back in." He turned to her, and for the first time since their campaign began, she saw something other than cold fury in his eyes. It was a deep, unyielding longing. The look of a man who had been in exile his entire life. "The galaxy can remake itself," he said. "That is not our concern. Let them have their councils and their pacts." He pointed a finger at the blank space on the map. "That is our concern, our only concern." He turned to the helm. "Signal the fleet. Our work here is done." A quiet acknowledgement chimed through the bridge. Across the system, the ships of the United Nations of Sol, now joined by vessels from their new allies, began to pivot as one. They turned their backs on the political turmoil of the core worlds, on the nascent government they had inadvertently created. That was a consequence of their mission, not the objective. The objective lay ahead, hidden behind the last great wall of their ancient prison. "Plot a course," Admiral Kane commanded, his voice ringing with absolute purpose. "Take us home." Thais, engines of the Vengeance and the 1,000 ships behind it flared to life, and the ghost fleet of humanity plunged once more into the unknown, leaving a remade galaxy in its wake as it resumed its unwavering path toward the faint stolen light of a long-lost star